The atmosphere in the laboratory was always cold, a sterile chill from polished metal, from the automated ventilation system, from those ever-burning, milky white lights that never went out. Dax Helion opened his eyes, and the first thing he felt was the weight of the biorestraints wrapped around his wrists and ankles. Pale blue light glared off the thick glass shield in front of his face, casting his own gaunt reflection back at him, his eyes a mixture of tension and exhaustion. Every sense seemed strangely heightened. He could pick out each click from the control panel, the steady thrum of the circulatory support machine, even the distant, muffled resonance of voices beyond the glass. This feeling was no longer unfamiliar to Dax. He had lived in the Valeris Prime research station for over a month, or rather, he had been held here as a rare biological specimen. His memories were hazy. The final interview on Earth, the moment he signed the Interspecies Biological Research Cooperation Agreement, then the endless days drifting in and out of drug-induced sleep, transit via cryopod, a dreamlike sequence that blended hope, fear, and curiosity into one. Now waking in a gigantic glass enclosure, surrounded by an array of monitoring machines, Dax felt like a creature caught and caged for display. In those first days, he had struggled, shouting for a human representative, demanding his right to freedom. But every word, every effort was recorded and extracted by the AI system, then left to languish in the cold data archives of Valeris Prime. Gradually, Dax learned to fall silent, to watch instead. He realized that, on this station, the attention of the aliens was the only currency that could keep him alive. The twin sisters made their first appearance after 3 days of relentless biomedical assessments, grueling tests that lasted for hours. Needles piercing his skin, sensors running along his spine, beams of light sweeping over his retinas as if searching the depths of his consciousness. They entered the room as if it were their natural domain, biosuits hugging their slender yet powerful frames. Silver hair cascaded over their shoulders, their pale greenish-blue skin gleaming like jade, their large eyes filled with an alien luminance that Dax had never seen in any human. Even standing side by side, Athisa and Neris radiated 2 entirely different auras. Athisa, the older sister, with her sleek, straight hair and deep cerulean eyes, moved with the calm composure of an orchestra conductor. She spoke little, but every word carried the force of a cold command. A small hand on the control panel could set the entire system alight, make warning lights flash, or set the testing chamber spinning with just a look. Athisa never displayed unnecessary emotion, but in those moments when she inspected the wound on Dax's shoulder, her touch was so gentle it sent a chill through him, cold and unsettling, yet tinged with a mysterious curiosity. In stark contrast, Neris, the younger sister, wore her wavy hair swept to one side, lips always curled in an unreadable, mischievous smile. Her voice was soft as a mountain stream, her movements quick and deft, her eyes sparkling with playful intelligence. Neris was often the one to begin each new test, her harmless questions subtly probing Dax's boundaries. "Have you ever felt excited by being observed?" She'd ask, her English flawless, then wink at her sister. Dax understood that for her, playing with a test subject was part of the job, or perhaps, a strange kink legitimized by velar genetics. The so-called functional tests soon took on an odd new color. They started with standard physiological checks, heart rate, blood tests, reflexes, but within days the routine shifted. Sensors were attached to the most sensitive areas. Thermal cameras recorded every surface change. Athisa stood close, observing every movement of his body, while Neris continually introduced new forms of biological stimulus, from faint electric pulses to low-frequency sounds, to special compounds tailored specifically for human physiology. Once in the neural tactile test chamber, Dax suddenly realized Neris's hand lingered on his neck far longer than necessary. Her fingertips traced small circles, at once measuring his pulse and stirring some deeper, hidden reaction. He dared not move, not out of fear, but because the sensation was so strange. In that sterile lab, the touch of an alien awakened his survival instincts, leaving him both wary and trembling with anticipation. When his eyes met Athisa, through the glass, he glimpsed a fleeting gentleness in her gaze. There, then gone in an instant. So each day for Dax became a series of collisions between instinct and reason, between fear and the mysterious allure of the two alien women. If Athisa always maintained control, keeping everything within the bounds of science and authority, then Neris was the rule-breaker, always finding new ways to push Dax beyond his comfort zone. Every time her hand accidentally slipped over his collarbone, or she leaned in close to check his breathing, his body heated in unpredictable ways. One night, with the surveillance system set to sleep mode, Dax quietly peered through the transparent glass. He saw the twins seated together before a massive data screen, his own bio readings, each heartbeat, every small motion, clearly displayed on a hovering hologram. Neris spun around to say something to Athisa. The two leaned together, exchanging data like intimate lovers on Earth. Suddenly, Dax understood. The bond between them was more than shared genetics. It was an instinctive, emotional connection, a kind of lifelong soulmate twinship that blended feeling and biology alike. From that night, Dax began to sense changes within himself. His body responded more quickly to every stimulus. His mind stayed clear even when drained of strength. In his restless sleep, he dreamed of two figures gliding around his laboratory bed, voices whispering both near and far beside his ear. Many times he woke in the dark, wondering, had they done something more than standard clinical tests to him? Or was it all the hallucination of someone trapped too long in a world without sunlight? On the 15th day, the procedures changed completely. Dax was released into the main lab, a vast space packed with blinking machines, glowing tanks of blue liquid, and rows of state-of-the-art medical equipment. No longer bound by biorestraints, he now wore flexible wrist sensors that allowed freedom of movement, though every vital sign remained tightly monitored. Athisa greeted him with a curt nod, while Neris beamed at him as if welcoming a new colleague. They began to converse more, asking about his family, childhood memories, dreams he'd had before coming to Valeris Prime. Dax realized that with every encounter, the distance between the three of them shrank. His stories about Earth, about bitterly cold winters, the sweetness of his mother's milk, the days he'd run for cover beneath summer rain, seemed to fascinate Athisa and Neris even more. They wanted to understand longing, affection, that thing called the desire to bond that humans wrote of in poetry. And so, one special evening, as Neris placed her hand on his chest to check his heartbeat, Dax couldn't resist. He clasped her hand, feeling its warmth seep through his skin. Neris didn't pull away, her eyes sparkled with delight, and this time, as Athisa watched in silence from behind, a smile flickered on her lips, one she couldn't hide. Emotions layered on top of one another, curiosity, anxiety, excitement, desire. Dax understood that with every touch, he was no longer just a test subject, but a gateway into a brand new world for all three of them. Each time Athisa tended to his wound, each time Neris grinned mischievously, he felt his biological rhythms blend with the most primal impulses deep inside him. On the final night of the first week of trials, with all the laboratory systems set to silence, Dax was suddenly awoken by a strange sensation on his skin. He opened his eyes to find Neris leaning close, her breath soft against his neck, her hand tracing hot circles down his chest. Above him, Athisa stood silent, her gaze both stern and gentle, her hand resting lightly on his forehead as if measuring his temperature, yet sending a current of feeling deeper than any diagnostic. "We need a result that surpasses every limit," Athisa whispered, her voice light as wind through crystal forests, yet carrying a force that commanded every sense Dax possessed. Neris bent down and pressed a kiss to his collarbone, soft, wet, utterly unlike any test before. Dax's body went rigid, every muscle surging with pleasure and astonishment. In that moment, the line between experiment and desire dissolved, leaving only 3 breaths woven together, the scent of skin mingling with sweat, longing, and a kind of hunger none of them had ever dared name. Neris's hand glided down Dax's body, each caress sending a strange signal up to his brain, at once investigative, possessive, and an open challenge to his rational mind. Athisa said nothing, only stood by with her hand still on his forehead, as if wielding supreme authority to keep everything within her own boundaries. But Dax felt it clearly. In her eyes, there was no longer the icy detachment of a scientist, but a yearning to experience, to understand, to be swept into a flow of feeling that only humans seemed able to share. The 3 of them were swept up in a strange dance, a place where biological boundaries broke down, where data merged with instinct, where desire and intellect moved in lockstep. That night Dax could no longer tell where it began or ended. All he knew was that when the simulated dawn glimmered across the glass ceiling, he had become an irreplaceable part of the experiment, or rather, part of a new ecosystem of emotion created by himself and the 2 alien sisters. Valeris Prime had never been so quiet. The entire lab seemed to hold its breath in the moment when 3 bodies merged as one, biosensor data spiking wildly across the screens, while Dax, Athisa, and Neris knew deep down. They had just crossed a threshold from which there could be no return, where test subject, scientist, and lover fused into a whole new kind of being. After that night, everything in Valeris Prime seemed to have turned upside down. Dax Helion woke up in a private sleeping chamber for the first time since arriving at the research station. There were no more biorestraints, no more blinding surveillance lights, only a thin blanket scented with essential oils, streaks of silver light spilling across the floor from the ceiling window. The warmth still lingered on the bedsheets, the traces of a sleepless night imprinted on every muscle and deep in his consciousness. Dax himself felt strange and changed. Every movement was full of energy, his mind clear, his senses heightened. He could hear even the hum of engines from distant corridors, feel each cold draft brushing against his wrist. Dax knew the reason. It wasn't just the biological effect of the experiments, but the lingering aftermath of that passionate encounter with the alien twins. He was no longer a simple specimen. He was becoming the center of a new force, full of longing and demand. On his first morning, as he stepped out into the gleaming corridor, Dax saw Neris perched on the balcony rail, her softly curled hair draping down, her metallic bodysuit shimmering, baring slim shoulders and long, unhidden legs. She smiled radiantly at him, making no attempt to hide the animal instincts flickering in her violet eyes. "You're up, Specimen 107. You look a lot healthier today." Dax raised an eyebrow and smiled awkwardly, feeling a strange new rhythm thrum in his chest. Before he could answer, Athisa appeared behind, still composed, long robe trailing to her heels, her cerulean eyes as cold as ice. This time, her gaze at Dax was more than mere assessment. It was a mix of curiosity, wariness, and a mysterious softness that only those who had shared that night could recognize. "The next assessment will begin at 9 a.m. You need to recharge, have breakfast, and prepare a biological sample." Athis's tone was still brief, but it no longer held the clinical harshness of a scientist. Dax nodded quietly and walked to the dining room where food was already prepared, strange fruits, iridescent liquids, and a glass of thick, creamy milk on a silver tray. He savored the unfamiliar sweetness, felt the energy spreading through his body, and could not stop thinking about the twins, at once familiar and foreign. When he entered the testing room, Dax immediately sensed the change in atmosphere. The monitoring AI was set to stealth mode, the cameras blurred behind giant frosted glass. Neris stood by the console, chattering about hormone readings, her eyes sparkling with delight as Dax took off his outer robe, exposing suntanned skin marked by scars from previous sessions. Neris moved quickly, attaching sensors to his chest, letting her hand drift lazily across his toned abdomen, intentionally drawing out each touch until Dax's skin flushed with heat. "We've recorded this. Your adaptive capacity exceeds all our predictions," she whispered, leaning in so close her breath made his spine shiver. "Not just that, your dopamine, oxytocin, even endorphins all surge with physical contact, especially with velar twins." Dax swallowed, feeling a wave of tension and excitement rise inside, especially as Athisa stood silent behind, her gaze boring straight into his mind. She adjusted the control panel and signaled for the system to lock the door. Now in the test room there were only the three of them, no outside noise, just their heartbeats, breathing, and the quiet whir of machines. Athisa approached and placed 2 fingers on Dax's neck to check his pulse, her blue eyes searching his as if trying to find an answer science could not articulate. "There are reactions here that surpass the data. It seems, among the 3 of us, a phenomenon is forming, some kind of biological resonance, something the Council never predicted." Neris giggled. "Well then, we have to see just how far we can take it." Without another word, she deftly removed the sensors from Dax's neck, slipped her hand around his nape and drew him in, her lips pressing against his, sweet, fiery, full of challenge. Neris's kiss was not only possessive, but a provocation, a primal signal to both Dax and Athisa. His body ignited with a thrill he had never felt, every muscle responding to her bold advances. His hands circled Neris's waist, pulling her closer, their breaths mingling in a moment where the line between subject and tester was erased. Athisa remained silent, but this time she did not turn away or intervene. Instead, she stepped closer, her slender hand resting on Dax's shoulder before gliding to his chest, fingertips stroking the burning skin. Dax looked up and caught her deep, gentle gaze, where struggle, curiosity, and something trembling, something only the 2 of them could understand, flashed within. She bent down and kissed his neck, gentle, tender, as if seeking to understand the very essence of man beneath the scientific shell. Now Dax no longer saw himself as a specimen. He was the focal point of their desire, the key unlocking something beyond the limits of both their species. Every kiss, every caress, whether from Neris or Athisa, held its own flavor. Neris was passionate, challenging, blazing like fire. Athisa was quiet, patient, sweet as the cold mist at dawn. 2 opposite energies merged, crashing over his body like an irresistible tidal wave of longing. They lost themselves in each other on the test room floor. It was no longer experiment, but the unleashing of raw instinct and curiosity. Neris straddled Dax, her disheveled silver hair glimmering, her lips seeking out every sensitive patch on his neck and chest, her fingers drawing invisible currents down to his lower belly. Athisa pressed gently into Dax's back, arms enveloping him, her cool skin the perfect counterpoint to Neris's heat, creating a sensation both soothing and agonizing. All the biomonitors on his skin flashed red, heart rate spiking, body temperature past safety limits, sexual hormones skyrocketing. But no one cared. The 3 of them fused into a tiny universe with only their lives entwined. Dax felt hunger, curiosity, and the urge to become part of the alien sisters, not just biologically, but spiritually, more deeply than any scientific trial could explain. After the wild wave of contact, they lay quietly together on the test room floor. Neris smiled, resting her head on Dax's chest, her hand lazily tracing circles, her breath still quivering with afterglow. Athisa leaned on his shoulder, eyes thoughtful, caught between fear and hope. She murmured, "We were programmed to analyze, to control, but with you, every hypothesis feels meaningless." Dax took their hands, squeezing them gently in an unspoken promise. A fierce realization rose within him. This connection was not just a result of biochemistry, but a choice of instinct and heart. That choice slowly flowed through both sisters as well. None of them voiced it, but all knew they had crossed a line they could never retreat from. From that day, the research regimen turned into free biological interaction sessions, where the lab was not just a place for data collection, but their own territory for waves of desire and mutual discovery. Dax felt the change in every touch, no longer the hands of researchers, but those of lovers, accomplices, souls longing to merge. One night, Neris took Dax into the station's simulated biogarden, a small forest alive with blue glowing flowers, damp air laced with the odd scent of resin. She pulled him onto a stone bench, placed her hand on his thigh, flashing a mischievous grin. "There are no cameras here, no AI, no system that can record what we truly feel." Dax leaned back, gazing at the dome overhead where artificial stars flickered on endless darkness. He let Neris caress him freely, her hands moving across his skin with total abandon. As her kisses trailed down his stomach, Dax moaned softly, every cell waking, merging with unnameable waves of pleasure. They made love beneath the glowing trees, bodies entwined, sweat, breath, laughter blending with muffled cries. No longer data, no longer an experiment, only primal instinct and absolute consent. After it all, Dax realized he had changed, biologically and in his soul. He no longer wished to leave Valeris Prime. On nights when neither Athisa nor Neris was there, he lay awake longing for their scent, their touch, the feeling of being at the center of these two strange energies. In those moments, he understood. He had become irreplaceable, not just in the research program, but in their minds, their hearts, and even in their deepest, most primal hungers. Each morning, as he woke, he looked toward the door, wondering if one of them might step silently inside, bringing a smile, a whisper, or just a glance enough to make him tremble. New trials loomed, secrets outside the lab were slowly revealing themselves. But one thing Dax was certain of: he would never be a passive specimen again. He would be the one who chooses, who leads, who becomes the heart of this strange, passionate bond that had surpassed every scientific limit. The days that followed passed in a blur, half real, half dreamlike. For Dax, all the old rules at Valeris Prime had been shattered. The laboratory was no longer a place of cold torture, but had become a domain of endless discovery, both of the flesh and the soul, and the limits of his own being. He gradually mastered the experiments, learning how to provoke and guide the rhythm of every contact, not just responding, but actively leading, drawing both Athisa and Neris into new realms of pleasure and fear. This transformation did not escape the notice of the sisters. If Neris was always eager for every wild idea, pulling Dax into secret interactions between biological modules, simulated gardens, or empty storage pods, then Athisa was becoming more cautious. She grew quieter, observing more, sometimes arguing intensely with her sister right in front of Dax about out-of-range readings, security alerts, or whether or not these results should be reported to the system. One evening, after the three of them had spent a feverish night beside the incubation tank, Athisa pulled Dax into the hallway, blue lights casting their long shadows across the cold, tiled floor. She gazed at him for a long time, her face unable to conceal her inner turmoil. "Dax, do you know here at Valeris Prime, there are no secrets the central AI cannot access? Since the first night, all our data has been recorded by the system. I tried to intervene to scramble the signals. But if the Council discovers the anomalies, everything ends, not just the project, but our freedom too." Dax placed his hand on her shoulder, his fingers gently tracing her collarbone as if by instinct. He said nothing, only looked deep into Athisa's cerulean eyes, now trembling. The icy hardness in her melted away, replaced by worry and a fragile vulnerability that only appeared when she was beside Dax. "So what do we do? Run away or face it head-on?" Dax asked softly, his voice lowering in the stillness. Athisa bowed her head and whispered, "I don't want to lose you or Neris, but the Council will never allow the fusion of human and Velar. They will erase every trace, even our memories." Dax felt the weight in her every word. Suddenly, he wanted to embrace her tightly, to comfort her, to protect her, to mend every fracture that power and prejudice had driven between them. He wrapped his arms around Athisa, drawing her to his chest. In an instant, the cold cloak was no longer a barrier, and the warmth of a human body merged with the alien woman's longing to be herself. They kissed, no longer a kiss of curiosity or experimentation, but of anger, desperation, and passion. Athisa trembled in his arms, her small hands gripping him as if afraid she might lose everything at any moment. That scene did not escape Neris. She appeared at the end of the hallway, silently witnessing the moment. In the dim light, it was unclear whether her expression was jealousy, curiosity, or sadness. But moments later, Neris returned to her familiar mischievous smile, running up to hug them both, pulling Dax and Athisa back to their private module. That night, under the silvery blue light of the medical module, Dax felt every emotional wave coursing between the sisters. Neris was bolder than ever, caressing him and whispering daring invitations in his ear, while Athisa comforted him gently, her eyes still glinting with unspoken anxiety. Their three bodies intertwined, no longer sure who was leading and who was following, only heat moving constantly across skin, fierce embraces, relentless kisses on shoulders, neck, the soft swell of Neris's breast down the length of Athisa's back. Every sensation was heightened by the danger and uncertainty they now faced. After ecstasy, there was silence. Dax lay between the sisters, arms around both. Neris pressed her cheek to his chest. Athisa rested her head on his left shoulder, her fingers tracing the small scars down his ribs. In the darkness, there was only the hum of medical devices and their mingled breaths. Suddenly, the data screen above the bed lit up, Central AI requesting high-level authentication. Athisa leapt up instantly, rushing to the control console, her hands moving with urgent precision, her gaze so intense it seemed she could break through every firewall. Neris leaned in, whispering softly in Dax's ear. "Don't worry, she's always the best at this. If anyone can save us, it's Athisa." But Dax knew things were no longer simple. The next morning, he was summoned to the main lab, meeting a representative of the council for the first time. A humanoid AI named Curian, cold and emotionless, its golden eyes piercing as if reading every secret buried within. Curian fired off questions about biological symptoms, about personal relationships with Valeris specialists, about strange emotions recently appearing in blood samples. Dax had to stay perfectly calm as he answered, concealing his fears with half-true, half-fabricated stories about the testing process, about curiosity, about hormone changes due to the new environment. But he knew one slip and the whole project and his future with the sisters would collapse completely. When the interrogation was over, Dax was allowed to return to his private module. There, Athisa and Neris were waiting, both their faces tight with fear and excitement. They threw themselves into each other, desperate to erase the danger with flesh and the craving to live every moment left. Their caresses were no longer just playful but became silent vows. If these were their last moments, they would not waste a second. For the first time, Dax took the initiative, pulling both sisters onto the bed, holding their bodies tight, his lips roaming from Athisa's neck to Neris's mouth, his hands exploring every curve, every secret place of their velar forms. He was no longer a subject being controlled. He had become the center, the one who determined every motion, every emotion, every carnal and spiritual game. After their frenzy, the three lay quietly together, eyes turned up to the glass ceiling where simulated stars blinked on and off. Athisa whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, "Perhaps we must choose. Either we openly defy the council or leave this place forever." Neris grabbed her sister's hand, her eyes shining with resolve. "I'll go anywhere, as long as I have you and Dax." Dax pulled them both close, his heart surging with fierce determination. "If we must fight, we fight together. If we must run, none of us will be left behind. Outside their module, Valeris Prime's alert system began to sound off abnormal warnings. Dax knew the moment of decision was near, and the fate of all three was now bound together by emotion, pleasure, and a will to defy every barrier. The 20th morning at Valeris Prime began with alarm bells echoing through every corridor of the research station. Dax jolted awake, cold sweat soaking his forehead, heart pounding as if he'd sensed the coming disaster before it arrived. On the screen beside his bed, a barrage of red alerts flashed. Unauthorized access to experimental data. Immediate explanation required. Before he could collect himself, the door burst open. Athisa rushed in, her eyes blazing with a fear he had never seen. Dax, Neris has been captured. Curian and the security team just took her to interrogation room 4. They discovered the entire sequence of our biosensory data, every recording, every unification reading. Dax gripped her shoulders tightly, feeling her body shake with rage and despair. "There's not much time," she whispered. "If she doesn't survive interrogation, all our memories will be erased. Or worse, you'll be made a permanent breeding specimen, and I'll be reduced to a research tool." A surge of anger erupted in Dax, not the passive fear of a test subject, but the will to protect, the urge to take charge, the raw masculine instinct unleashed in the face of danger. "Athisa, we have to act. We'll save Neris. Even if it costs us everything." They ran through modules, dodging cameras, slipping beneath overgrown auxiliary corridors in the station's biogarden system. The air was stifling, warning lights pulsed everywhere. Athisa used her last high-level access to open a secure door that led to a technical compartment next to the interrogation room. They paused, breathless, backs against the wall, exchanging a look that was both solidarity and encouragement. In that moment, no words were needed, just a touch, a kiss, each giving the other strength through burning breath and the wild rush of life. Inside the interrogation room, Neris was strapped to an electro chair, violet eyes glimmering with defiance. Curian's voice was icy steel, interrogating her relentlessly about the source of mutation in the biosensory response, and the true purpose of unifying Specimen 107 with velar twins. Every answer from Neris was clever, evasive, never quite incriminating, yet always stoking the AI's suspicion. Suddenly, the room's power flickered, the main screen shifted to alert mode. Athisa had hacked in, streaming false data straight to the surveillance interface, scrambling the biological readings. In the chaos, Dax charged into the room, knocking out 2 guards, freeing Neris from her restraints. The 3 of them bolted down the corridor as alarms wailed, the echo of pursuit footsteps growing ever closer. They darted through biocore rotors, slid down an emergency stairwell toward the simulated reproduction chamber, a place that once stored secret files about hybridization between velar and other species. Dax slammed the door shut with an emergency code. All 3 collapsed, panting in the blue-tinted light. Breath mingled, sweat trickled down foreheads and bodies, tension and the desperate hunger to survive filling every corner of the sealed room. Athisa looked deep into their eyes, her voice breaking but full of resolve. "This may be our last hours. If so, let's make everything that's left ours alone. No data, no AI, no counsel, only the 3 of us and our primal selves." No one said anything more. They collided into each other as if every kiss, every touch was their last hope and greatest liberation. Neris tore off her cloak, purple hair tumbling over Dax's shoulders, her full breasts trembling under the blue light. Athisa was gentle yet wild, clutching him from behind, slender hands exploring every secret of his body, as if to etch every feeling into the deepest folds of memory. Dax's body surged with strength. He devoured Neris's lips, then turned to find Athisa's mouth. The 2 velar bodies pressed tight against him, every last boundary erased between violence and gentleness, between survival ecstasy and defiant love. Moans, rapid breathing, sweat, The grip of fingers on flesh as if to claim each other forever. The whispered words, "Don't leave, please don't leave," echoed through the lockdown chamber. At the peak of pleasure, a surge of energy exploded through all three. Dax felt every nerve blazing, heart pounding, every sensation magnified by the danger and terror of loss. In that moment, a new signal appeared on the biomonitor. A complete unified genetic sequence, the first stable hybrid between human and velar. Athisa gasped, tears streaming down her cheeks in confusion, pain and happiness mixed. Neris buried herself in Dax's chest, gripping her sister's shoulder, trembling, laughing through her tears. "If this is the end, I have no regrets." Dax held them both close, whispering in each ear, "We won't let anyone tear us apart. Our fate is our own to choose." Just then, pounding fists hammered on the door. Valeris Prime's security system began breaking the lock by force, Curian and the guards closing in. Dax looked at the sisters, determination blazing in his eyes, a wild plan forming in his mind. "Athisa, Neris, trust me. Right now, either we become history or we lose everything, but I won't live without you." The three scrambled to gather all their biological data, merging it into a single genetic string, sending it to the orbital satellite system. Athisa programmed the self-destruct sequence for all data at Valeris Prime. Neris hacked into the control interface, preparing the ultimate distraction. The hatch burst open, security agents flooding in just as a wave pulse from Dax's emitter swept the room, disabling all machines, and the three used the chaos to escape down the just-opened maintenance tunnel. Alarms blared throughout Valeris Prime. Outside, a secret satellite began receiving the genetic code of three fugitives, a new symbol for a chapter of evolution no one could ever control. Behind them, the research station drowned in red alerts. Ahead, three souls, one Earthling, two velar, plunged into the darkness of the technical shafts, carrying with them fragile hope, fading pleasure, and a biological secret powerful enough to change both species forever. Alarm sirens echoed through the spiraling corridors of Valeris Prime. Dax led the way, his hand gripping Athisa's wrist tightly, while Neris slipped through every shadowy gap behind them, all three dodging under the constant flash of red emergency lights. Every turn, every automatic door was fraught with the risk of discovery. Dax's mind worked like a true warrior, every sense heightened, his memory replaying the research station's map, knowing that a single mistake would doom them to the cold darkness of a bioprison. They sprinted through the data archive, crawled through mossy maintenance tunnels, their ragged breaths mingling with the pounding footsteps of the security team in pursuit. At times, Athisa would stop suddenly to hack a lock, sending out a temporary jamming pulse to prevent Curian from tracking their biosignals. Neris never stopped encouraging, "Keep going, we're almost there. I know a shortcut straight to the escape bay, just a few more minutes." Once, as they rounded the climate simulation chamber, two guards blocked their path. Dax didn't hesitate. He lunged forward with primal force, knocking one down, while Athisa used an electro device to disable the other. Neris quickly grabbed a security badge, unlocked the door, and dragged the group forward. In that brief moment, Dax caught in their eyes not just fear, but pride, a burning will to survive, and the fierce love that would risk everything for one another. They hid for a while in an old maintenance bay, alarms still wailing outside, beams of light slicing through the door crack like icy knives. The three fell silent, catching their breath, backs pressed against the cold metal wall, their breaths blending into a single heartbeat. In that moment, Athisa suddenly threw her arms around Dax, her lips trembling against his, a kiss born not only of fear, but of resolve, a commitment to survival. Neris knelt beside them, arms wrapped around both their waists, her lips brushing Dax's neck, Athisa's cheek, her eyes shining with tears. "I'm not afraid anymore," Neris whispered, her voice mixing sobs with determination. "No matter what happens, we're already part of each other." Dax looked at the twins, feeling a surge of intense emotion, no longer simple pleasure, but the sacred bond of three souls standing against the storm. He pulled them close, this kiss both gentle and fierce, two mouths, two skins, two heartbeats merging as one. Their trembling from fear transformed into a desperate will to live. Every touch and every kiss became urgent, as if stopping would mean losing everything. Athisa climbed onto Dax's lap, her silver hair falling over his shoulders, her hands searching for life's path across his back, as if touching new territory for the first time. Neris pressed close, kissing, murmuring encouragements, her lips seeking the feeling of belonging to both Dax and her sister. In that cramped space, the scent of skin, sweat, and breath merged into something strange, passed from fingertips, through burning thighs, through every part of bodies shivering with hunger and comfort. They made love in the midst of panic, their cries stifled, silent waves of pleasure rising between danger and the nearness of death. This was no longer a biological experiment, but the final proof of life, the choice of freedom against all rules. Every caress, every act of union was an immortal vow. If this was the last moment, at least they had lived, had loved, had touched the most sacred core of their being. After that quiet interlude, Neris sprang up, her eyes alight with cunning. "Let's go, we have to survive. If not, no one will ever tell this story except Curian and those cold AI brains." They rushed forward, past the auxiliary power room, through massive ducts damp with steam and dust. At the last bay, they faced the final control gate, the only exit leading to the station's escape ship. But just then the system detected them. The heavy steel doors slammed shut. Curian appeared on the main screen, his voice cold and echoing. "Specimen 107, Athisa, Neris, you have violated the Council's highest law. Surrender yourselves or be erased from memory and data forever." Dax met the twins' eyes, the fire of defiance burning. "We don't surrender. If we must vanish, we vanish together. If we must die, let it be as free beings." Athisa nodded, triggering two disruptors and a genetic encryption device at once, crippling the AI sensors in the bay. Neris hacked into the controls, scrambling the ID system, sending out 20 biological decoys across the station. In the chaos, Dax pulled them into his arms for one last kiss. This kiss not a farewell, but the beginning of freedom. The door burst open, only 1 minute for a life-or-death choice. They dashed to the rescue ship, the hatch sealed behind, and the autopilot launched them away from Valeris Prime. Under the violet light of unknown space, the three clung together, their bodies and souls melting into weightlessness, pain and pleasure dissolving into tears. "We're free," Athisa whispered, her lips brushing Dax's neck, Neris's arms tightening around them both. In those last moments on the escape ship, the three made love as if there would never be another dawn, their bodies entwined, laughter, tears, and moans weaving a symphony of survival and new beginnings. Outside, Valeris Prime shrank to a pinprick of light in the vast universe. Inside the ship, three beings, two velar aliens, one human, had crossed every boundary. They were no longer a specimen, a scientist, or evidence, but the living proof of freedom, love, and evolution beyond any ancient law. The rescue ship raced through the endless darkness of space, drifting among unfamiliar stars and cold streams of energy swirling around the distant Valeris Prime they'd left behind. Inside the cramped cabin, Athisa, Neris, and Dax clung tightly together, their breaths mingling, bare skin still carrying the aftershocks of fear, ecstasy, and happiness. No one spoke aloud, but a single glance, a gentle touch, was enough to know they'd all just crossed a threshold of fate from which there was no return. In those first days, the ship drifted on autopilot and emergency reserves. Outside the window, a distant star burned bright, a sign of new life ahead. Within, the three lived as if each second was the universe's last gift. Sharing meals, sleeping side by side, exchanging warmth with boundless love and unrestrained desire. Each night, as thick darkness swallowed every trace of the past, Dax would gather both women in his arms, his hand caressing every strand of hair, every curve of Athisa and Neris's bodies, each kiss sparking a tiny flame against the void. Every caress, every time they made love, was no longer just to satisfy carnal thirst, but a way to remind themselves that they were still alive, still in love, still writing their own story. There was no AI, no more data, no counsel, no cold, distant machinery, only 3 free souls, 3 bodies melded as one, 3 hearts beating to the same rhythm. Athisa changed the most. Once a rigid scientist, she gradually shed her icy cloak, revealing a tenderness and femininity long buried beneath discipline and fear. Her blue eyes grew warmer every time she looked at Dax and Neris, her voice softened, and every tale she told of Velar was laced with laughter and a loving gaze no one had ever seen before. Neris became the living spirit of their tiny ship. She always knew how to keep boredom at bay, telling jokes, inventing mischief, tempting the others into every game possible in such a small space. Many nights, it was Neris who would pull Athisa and Dax together, caressing, sharing kisses, sparking a fire of passion and warmth even as the universe outside remained frozen and empty. Dax, once a solitary specimen, was now the anchor, the flame connecting every emotion, the pillar that helped the Velar sisters overcome all uncertainty. He no longer felt small or weak beside alien strength, but realized true power lay in his ability to love, to inspire, to choose freedom, even if it meant risking everything. After a week adrift, the ship's sensors discovered a blue-green planet on the charts, lying outside the Council's reach. This world had once been a pioneering outpost, abandoned after a biodisaster years ago. The 3 decided to land, none certain of the future but none afraid, because now they were family, each other's entire world. On the planet's surface, they built a small shelter beside a silver stream, beginning a new life with nothing but their own hands and a fierce hope to rise above fate. They planted seeds from the ship's stores, tended a garden, explored local life forms, studied the ecosystem, part scientist, part children, savoring perfect freedom for the first time. At night, under a sky thick with stars, Dax would lie between his 2 women, hearing Athisa's slow heartbeat in his right ear and feeling Neris's excited breath on his left. Sometimes in the midst of sweet pleasure, Dax would laugh softly and ask, "Do we have enough milk for 2?" Neris would tease, "More than that, you're the new source of life for this whole world." Athisa would only smile, drawing them both close, her kiss gentler than any words of gratitude. Time passed, and on that little planet, a new life began to grow, the genetic blend of Earth and Velar, a living testament to love without borders, a legacy surpassing every prejudice of the Council and the cold minds that once tried to dictate fate. The child was born amid laughter and happy tears, a beginning for a new era of evolution that no force in the universe could ever erase. In Dax's memory, the image of waking for the first time beneath the sterile lights of a laboratory still lingered. But now everything was different. He was no longer Specimen 107, no longer a thing to be controlled, but an inseparable part of 2 Velar souls, a father of a new generation, a pioneer for a world where freedom, desire, love, and human will blended into an indestructible force. Valeris Prime was now only the past. Before them stretched a future without barriers, a place where love knew no limits, where pleasure became the voice of life, where every choice and every touch was the beginning of a new history.